Hey, the more I read about this tillage, the more I think, well, maybe we should get together and chew on this for a little while. And I don't know if you're working with a research group, but I could bring in the government documents librarian and we could talk about it, because it seems like it's definitely tied to government policy, and it's definitely tied to things like the Dust Bowl and the drought in the 1930s, and economic success, failure, the Clean Water Act in the late 60s, early 70s, whenever that happened. I know Nixon signed it. So all of those things might make a difference. But just in general, here's how I would go about it. So the first place, if we want to know when something was important, I always go to Google Ngrams. I think I did this in a class. This is like a full text searching of all the books scanned by the good folks at Google. So there's academic libraries, complete collections, and if we type in tillage, we get some date. I can move my head down. We get some dates, but what happens if we make it case insensitive? Then the dates might change. So people shouting tillage, tillage. That's it seems like they shouted a little bit in the 1980s. And then if it was capitalized, that might mean it was the introduction to something, might have been the beginning of a sentence, I don't know. But you can see there's a clear trend from 1800 going down. Why? Maybe it's because of like the industrial era. So is that like the industrialization of tractors and things like that? Does that happen around now? Whereas back here it's like oxen. I don't know. But you can see there was an ebb down here post-war because the economy is doing great and we're just flush with money. But then environmental concerns start to grow and it kind of peaks in 84, 85. What's going on around then? I remember, when was that Farm Aid? Like farms were being foreclosed on, and maybe they were looking for better ways of, like, when was that first concert? 1985. There was a lot of farmers being foreclosed on. And they were losing their properties because people are consolidating and making bigger and bigger farms, and corporate farms are growing. And yada yada yada. Does that affect that? So this is one place you can go. I would take that information and go, okay, so maybe it's the 1980s. Put my head back up. It feels so awkward being down there. Another place to look for timelines of evidence of like when it mattered before we go into the citations is there's a historic database. Actually, there's quite a few. One of them is called New York Times Historic. And, historical. New York Times Historical Newspaper. It only comes up to 2016, but you could put a word in like tillage in the title. But I'm not going to do it in the title because I found out that wasn't good enough. I'm just going to put tillage. So if it shows up and it's important enough, and we know tillage is a very valuable word because it represents all sorts of different ideas and concepts. If we look for that, you can do a date range thing in here too. And you can see it didn't really matter until World War II, end of the Depression. So this is probably the 1920s. 1920s is when mechanization really comes in. I have a lot of farmer relatives. And so the mechanization and the engineering of farming came in, whereas before this was just kind of like a trade that people would do, and it didn't change forever. So maybe this was kind of an innovative tech time. But post-war, what's going on? It goes back down again, and we don't see that reflection. Here's what I would like you to consider. When you go in here, look for concepts like zero tillage, in quotes, and they're talking about energy use. Some real estate, efficiency, ending medieval tillage by force. Dear God, that sounds terrible. Subsoil tillage. Some other things that I've seen are groundwater, nitrates, and pesticides, and drought. So Jeez, you never know what you're going to find. So then we go into the scholarship. JSTOR is really good if you want to find historic things, because that one, the scholarship goes way back. But Web of Science is a good one for looking at like what's happened in recent 20 to 50 year history pretty reasonably, if we have an idea of what we're looking for. So Web of Science. And this may be where you're pausing the video and are like, oh, let's go talk to Dale. So if you look for tillage in the title, so remember the most important thing is in the title in a scholarly article, and then in the abstract, and then later in the paper, but they want to narrow it down. So I think we're safe doing that. And if we do a search, there's 11,000. And here you can see, you can sort by number of citations, which I've already done. So the most highly cited article about no tillage, but with tillage in it, there's crop rotation, is from December 2000. But here's some 1999. And I was hoping to find one that went back to that bump in the 80s. And here we go. Soil microbial and biochemical changes associated with reduced tillage. This one was so influential that it's still being cited decades down the road. That might be a way where you figure out what you're looking for. Let me show you another trick. I'm going to add a row. And are you looking for something like, let's say pesticides? And you could even be specific and say like Roundup or DDT, pesticides. But let's say I'm going to do pesticide star. And I'm going to look for that in the title too. Pesticide star gets pesticide or pesticides, which I could also do in that or statement like we did in library class. But I'm going to look in the title for both of those. And now we're going to get down to 31. But if we go by highest cited first, you can see the relationship of tillage and pesticide leaching. Ooh, that's another good keyword too. So 90, 94, 78. This might be, so if you're looking at pesticides, this could be it. A rainfall simulation study. Wow, that is powerful. Small watersheds. And like I said, this is what my brother does. It's fantastically fascinating and how politics have changed over the years. Another thing you can do is you go to this see all under publication years, and you can see when people are writing about it, and you can see trends. So you could say there was a big trend in 1989 and 87. There's 3 articles. It's not a huge trend, but that's one way of looking at it. So let's do another one. Let's do ground water. This is what my brother worked with in Nebraska. There's a big groundwater lake that farmers in Nebraska have been using for a long time, and it's slowly going away. But how does that relate to tillage? Man, back 1990. So you start to see trends starting to occur. So as you go through these, write down keywords and do tillage and try searching in Web of Science, and you'll start to see things going on that you are interested in. Will there be a moment where you find like all the signs point to the perfect article? No. This is something where you're going to have to interpret it and figure out what you think is close enough. Because there's different aspects and paradigms and lenses you can look through. So there's like groundwater nitrates, politics, real estate, all of those different things. The most important thing, you get to negotiate that and present it as your case. So don't have any imposter syndrome when you end up picking one. You're doing your due diligence and considering all the options, and you're presenting it as part of the evidence in your paper. But I'm happy to help.